Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Big Ideas in Education. I'm Ryan Kairalla from Academica Media. Our topic this week is teacher recruitment and retention, and what role data analytics can play in helping us find and keep the best teachers. Joining us on the program this week is Emily Chase Coleman. She is the co-founder and CEO of HAI Analytics, a renowned education consulting firm. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting haianalytics.org. Dr. Coleman, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, we got to have you this week. We should be having you every week because this is such an important topic. This is the 5-alarm fire in education right now. Teacher retention, teacher turnover. It's the hot topic right now. And so we're excited for your insight on this. Given everything that's going on, and we all know that teacher turnover is a fact of life, but I think there is some discussion about what is to blame for increased teacher turnover. How much of this is policy factors? How much of this is driven by the pandemic? What else is at play? In your opinion, what are the most significant drivers of the increased teacher turnover rates in K-12 that we're seeing right now?
I think teachers face a lot of challenges that they haven't in the past, or those challenges have escalated. Certainly pay is nowhere near what it should be for public school teachers. They're being asked to do more with fewer resources. And then there's danger in schools and worries about safety and, all of those kind of issues. So I think it is a very tough profession to be in right now. And those who are doing it really are amazing for sticking with it.
I certainly share that view. I mean, that being said, though, I think when it comes to teaching, a lot of the things that you're bringing up have always been things that we've associated with the teaching profession, right? We for generations, nobody's going to disagree when you say teachers are underpaid or teachers are overworked or teachers are frustrated with all of the socioeconomic obstacles that they have to overcome to do their jobs effectively. So what is it about what's been going on in just the last few years that seems to be kicking a lot of these factors into overdrive?
One of the things that I've seen, even just with my own children in their schools, is that the Department of Education sort of keeps coming out with different standards or different educational criteria. And it really changes so rapidly. So, there was no child left behind, and the policy behind that and the structure of that. And then it was the core curriculum. And, I personally started seeing my kids learning math in ways that I was completely unfamiliar with. And then that changed. And so it just for a kid in elementary school to have, what we're emphasizing teaching change so often. And then for the teachers that they have to adapt to this, I mean, it really is just I don't know that disorganized is the right word, but it just, it needs to be, there needs to be more predictability and more, I think, talking about data research behind, what really should we be teaching and what are the factors that kind of predict student success. And of course, teachers want their students to be successful. But I think that those changes in kind of the structure of the curriculum have been, I would imagine, very tough for teachers to adapt to year after year.
And there is definitely something to be said for the need to start looking at the data and finding data-driven solutions to this retention crisis that we're seeing in education. I'd love to, before we get into some of those data points that you have, I'd like to get an idea of just the scope of the problem and what the numbers are telling us in that regard. I mean, obviously, we know the impacts that increased teacher turnover is having educationally for our schools. But how about fiscally? Do you have any data or information that can help us grasp the scope of how much of a dollars and cents problem teacher retention is, how expensive teacher retention is for schools and their resources?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, I don't have data that could speak to that. But it absolutely, I think, is something that, schools need to focus on and realize that it can be much less expensive to retain a teacher you already have than to recruit a brand new teacher. So I don't have data on that, but I do see kind of, just not enough funds being funneled into public education, and teachers having to go elsewhere as a result.
That's an interesting point, though. You mentioned there that generally for schools, it's almost always less resource intensive to keep the teachers you have rather than to have to find somebody new. What are the costs that go into that finding somebody new? I assume we're talking about the cost to recruit, the cost to retain, to onboard that teacher, the costs of what you've lost in terms of that experienced teacher who, has a lot of subject matter knowledge and knows how to control a classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you really hit the major points there. I mean, we know that the first year for every teacher is really tough. You're sort of getting used to it and getting into the rhythm of it. And so if teachers can stay beyond, the first few years, then I think they're more likely to stay beyond that. Otherwise, schools are just left in this this cycle where they have to keep recruiting and finding new teachers and training them, as you said, and that's expensive, and it takes a lot of resources. It takes resources away from the school itself and what it could be using just to educate the children.
Well, then we got to get a handle on this problem. So let's come back to the data here, because I know that's a centerpiece of how your company takes on these kind of interventions. You explore data-driven solutions. So what does the data tell us in terms of what can be a successful way for schools and systems to address teacher turnover?
I think, one of the key elements about what I do and what we talk a lot about is that we need to be looking, each school needs to be looking inside itself. So we do a lot of research with higher education institutions, and we can say things like, there are certain factors that tend to influence retention, but those factors vary quite a bit from one college to the next. And the amount of the effect that a certain factor has varies. So schools now, just like every organization, they have a ton of data. They have teacher data, they have student data. I don't think that they have the resources or, the people in place who can really use that data to drive strategy and policy. But so I think that, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it really can vary. And to get ahead of this problem, I think each school needs to sort of be looking at itself, at its own population. What does it need to do to retain teachers?
Well, that's a really poignant insight in itself, because I think what you're suggesting, and what I guess your own work has shown over the years, is that there aren't a lot of one-size-fits-all data-driven solutions to addressing this issue, right? If we want to address it, every school is going to have their own unique sets of circumstances, their own unique levers that have to be pulled to address that issue on their particular school campus. So I'm guessing, just sort of, based on what you've kind of communicated to me here, you must not be a huge fan of heavily top-down interventions when it comes to addressing issues in education.
I'm not. I think,
okay.
But I do think, there are some major issues that across the board need to be addressed, like teacher salary, which we've already talked about. So those, there are some universals, but I think that to tackle the problem, we really need to look sort of on a case-by-case basis.
Do you have any insights on, getting back to these universals and understanding that, there aren't as many top-down solutions as we might think? Are there any universals of things that you feel fairly confident don't work to address this problem? Maybe some conventional wisdoms about teacher retention that your work has suggested doesn't really fix the issue as much as we would hope.
Yeah, one thing is I think that there is kind of this belief that if we lighten the burden on teachers, that will help. So I've seen in schools where, you know, there are no clubs that involve teachers because they don't want to add to teachers' workloads, which of course makes sense, but it can kind of take away this piece that that ties a teacher to a school. So I don't think that's the driving factor. I think that as a result of everything else that's going on and the lack of support for them, they just don't have the capacity to sort of do these things outside the classroom. But if we could make it so that they did, they may actually enjoy the work more because they may feel, more tied to the school.
Well, that's pretty interesting. So it's not as much about the workload itself. I mean, every teacher I've met, they've never been afraid of some hard work. And that's why they got into the profession, because they want to do work that's worth doing. And
Yes.
if you're taking away teachers' ability to coach a sports team that they really care about, or, run a school club that they were a member of when they were in high school, and instead replacing that with a bunch of work that is monotonous or is repetitive or doesn't directly relate to improving student outcomes, I could see that leading to burnout.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a matter of taking away the wrong things. So trying to lighten their load and taking away the things that are easiest to take away. But that still leaves a lot of the issues that teachers are facing just within the classroom.
So you think that's why this is happening, is that, the school says, okay, we need to lighten teachers' workloads. And when they look at what a teacher's workload is, it's a lot easier to just say, well, you can't coach the chess team anymore, instead of trying to actually get into the weeds of like all the administrative and paperwork stuff that teachers have to do and figure out how to lighten that workload instead. And so by going for the easier but more fulfilling work and taking that away, you might be reducing that teacher's workload, but you're also increasing the likelihood that they're not going to stick around next year.
Yes, I think that is true. And of course, not in every case, but I do think that's a factor. The other important thing is that it isn't just teacher turnover, it's sort of the administration, the superintendents and the principals. Again, I have kids in elementary school, and within 7 years, I think we saw 4 different principals at the same school. And each principal comes in with new goals and new priorities, and that leaves teachers again kind of scrambling to adapt. So it's a field where it's particularly rough to have as much change as we're currently seeing in the workforce. It's just very disruptive.
That's powerful insight. And, it gets back to this idea of, your advocacy for more bottom-up education, right? Every principal that comes in and brings in like a completely new vision and system and ways for teachers to do things, that sort of just takes away the power and autonomy of individual teachers to run their classrooms as they see fit. And losing that autonomy can often create a situation where teachers get burned out faster.
Absolutely.
I want to shift gears a little bit because I know this is a topic that you've written about a lot, which is AI. And when I think of a field that is poised for disruption or having to change the way they do things in the face of AI the most, I think of consulting. I think of consulting as a field where AI could really supercharge what you do for a living if utilized the right way. But, for some consultants might actually pose a danger to the work that they do. Where do you sort of stand on the potential for AI for your profession and for education as a whole?
I think there is huge potential. I think, as you said, if used in the right way, it can really be transformative, and it doesn't necessarily replace humans. It more kind of augments. But I agree with you. And HAI analytics, the HAI stands for human and artificial intelligence, because when we founded the company, one of the things that we had been seeing a lot of is this idea that, AI can figure it out, or we have these complex statistical models, these machine learning models. You just pour the data in and, you get the answer. And that can lead to all sorts of problems and biases. So we know that with any use of AI, there has to be a human not only deciding, what goes in on the front end, but then interpreting what comes out. So used correctly, I think it's an amazing tool. And people just kind of need to keep in mind that there has to be that human oversight.
I love that insight, and I just love the optimism that you bring to the rise of AI. Right, there's a lot of folks who will tell us that the sky is falling, particularly those of us in the education business, and it's nice to hear a more refreshing perspective on it. Our guest has been Emily Chase Coleman of HAI Analytics. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting haianalytics.org. Before we let you go, we got one last question for you. If with the snap of your fingers you could make any change to the education system, what change would it be?
Oh, honestly, I think it would have to be, the amount of money that they receive, public schools receive to educate children. And that would go toward, teacher salary and, resources for the kids. And I know that that's sort of an easy answer to pick, but I do think it is such a huge problem that, where we funnel taxpayer dollars, it isn't always in the right places. And, people say the children are the future, and that's so cliche, but it really is. We need to sort of invest more in education and value it, I think, more as a society.
No argument here. Dr. Coleman, thank you so much for being on the program this week.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for checking out Big Ideas in Education.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.